In September of 1844, the people of Beaufort County, South Carolina witnessed an announcement so shocking, so unbelievable, that even the most brutal slaveholders fell silent. A planter named Abner Caldwell, owner of the infamous Riverbend plantation, stood in the center of the county square and declared, "The undefeated man will fight no more." He was referring to a single enslaved man, Jonah, a towering, silent, terrifyingly powerful fighter who had killed 37 men in the dust floors of the private duel rings. He had never lost. Not once. And yet Caldwell claimed Jonah was finished. Retired. Removed. Hidden. What the crowd did not know was that Jonah had not agreed to any such thing. What they did not know was that the night before, something happened in the death ring. Something witnessed by only 4 men, 3 of whom would be dead within the month. The 4th man disappeared. Rumors spread like fire across the county. Some whispered Jonah had gone mad. Others claimed he had killed a white man too valuable to lose. Some said he had snapped the oak post they chained him to, and no chain had held him since. But the truth was far darker. By December of that same year, Riverbend's main house would burn to the ground. 15 bodies would be found inside. And Jonah, the undefeated fighter who never spoke unless ordered, would vanish from the Carolina Lowcountry completely. No one knew where he went. No one knew how he escaped. No one even knew whether he was alive. The slave patrols searched for months. Posters went up. Rewards were offered. Caldwell himself demanded that Jonah be returned, dead or alive, though privately he begged the patrols to kill him on sight. But nothing. No trace. Only silence. What really happened the night Jonah fought his final duel? What occurred in the lantern-lit pit that made grown men run like children? What did he see, and what did he do, that terrified every man who witnessed it? Before we uncover the disturbing truth, subscribe, hit that bell icon, and comment your state below. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The Carolina Lowcountry in the 1840s was a world that seemed to sweat even in winter. Humidity clung to the air like an invisible weight, pressing down on the earth until the mud along the riverbanks felt alive. Spanish moss dangled from the limbs of ancient live oaks, swaying like funeral shrouds whenever the slightest breeze passed through. The air smelled of brine and decaying vegetation, of rice fields flooded to the ankle and swamps where cicadas screamed from dawn to dusk. This was the land that shaped Riverbend Plantation, a stretch of fields, forests, and marshland spread across nearly 900 acres. But beneath the beauty of the land lurked a quiet, calculated violence that was older than the plantation itself. Abner Caldwell understood that violence better than most. He was a man who pretended at refinement, oval spectacles, tailored coats, polished boots, yet the truth lay behind his eyes, an unrelenting hunger for power and the wealth it could produce. Riverbend had not always been prosperous. When Abner inherited it from his father in '36, the place was near collapse. The soil was exhausted. The rice barns were failing. The enslaved workforce was demoralized and diminishing. But Abner Caldwell saw opportunity where others saw decay. He rebuilt the levees, purchased new equipment, and expanded the slave quarters. He made the estate profitable again, but profitability was never enough. He wanted dominance. He wanted whispers of fear and admiration whenever men spoke his name. And in time he found a way to secure it. What the genteel families of Beaufort County never suspected was that deep beneath the old tobacco barn, underneath layers of rotting boards and packed soil, Caldwell had constructed something forbidden. A circular pit, 12 feet across, surrounded by wooden posts and iron hooks, lit by oil lanterns that cast long trembling shadows across the walls. The place smelled of sweat, blood, and the iron-like bite of fear. This was his private death ring. He did not call it that. No one dared speak the name aloud, but that was what it was. A place where enslaved men were forced to fight until one stopped moving. A place where wealthy plantation owners and traveling gamblers gathered in secret to wager fortunes on the spectacle. The law would have ended Caldwell's operations if the law cared to look. But the men who attended his gatherings were the same ones responsible for enforcing order across the county. Wealth bought silence. Blood bought entertainment. And Caldwell used both as currency. Jonah had been the greatest prize Caldwell ever acquired. People still argued about his exact age. Some said he was 24, others claimed 28. Jonah himself had never corrected anyone. He wore silence as naturally as his own skin. He was tall enough to look most white men in the eye without raising his chin, broad-shouldered, corded with muscle, and covered in scars that made it seem as though life had carved its anger into him with a knife. He moved with a stillness that startled people, gliding instead of walking, calculating instead of reacting. And what unsettled most men was not his size, nor the violence he could unleash with it, but the calmness he held even in the heat of battle. Jonah rarely spoke. When he did, it was in soft, measured tones that made men lean in to hear him. Some believed it was because he feared nothing. Others believed it was because he felt too much, and speaking would fracture the fragile peace he maintained within himself. Riverbend's enslaved community avoided Jonah when they could, respected him when they could not. They called him the quiet storm among themselves. Children whispered stories about him. How he once broke a bull's neck with his bare hands, how he survived a fever that killed 3 others, how he could see in darkness the way others saw in daylight. None of these tales were true in full, yet none were entirely false either. Jonah did have a way of standing in the shadows as though he belonged there. He did have a strength that made the strongest men wary. And he did have a gaze that seemed to read the fearful parts of a person's soul. Caldwell understood fear better than anyone, and he cultivated it. His eyes glimmered whenever wealthy visitors approached him after a duel, asking with trembling voices if Jonah was truly human. He never answered directly. He let them fill in the blanks. Fear made men wager more. Fear made them return. Fear made Jonah valuable. But what the spectators, planters, and gamblers did not know, not yet, was that Jonah had begun to change. Not visibly at first. His expression stayed the same, calm, controlled, unreadable. But something in him had started to pull tight like a rope fraying at the ends. Some nights he walked the edge of the fields long after dusk, staring at the dark line of the river as though waiting for something to rise from it. Other nights he woke in the quarters with his fists clenched and the taste of blood in his mouth. He did not know why. Not yet. Neither did Abner Caldwell. Neither did the men who profited from Jonah's destruction. But all of them would learn soon enough. And when they did, they would wish they had never stepped foot on Riverbend at all. Jonah did not remember much of his childhood, but the pieces he did recall came back in fragments. Flashes of sunlight on cracked Georgia soil, the warm weight of his mother's hand around his wrist, and the low voice she used whenever she sensed trouble approaching. Her name had been Maria, a woman who carried both gentleness and a fierce, quiet defiance in her bones. She had worked in the weaving house of a small plantation outside Augusta, where the days followed a predictable rhythm and the nights rarely offered rest. But Maria believed in signs. She believed that every soul came into this world with a burden attached, and she believed her son had been born carrying something too heavy for one child. "You was born strong," she whispered to him once, when he was no more than 8 years old, his arms already solid from helping in the fields. But strong don't always mean safe. Remember that. Jonah understood her in a way only children raised in captivity could understand their parents, through silence, gesture, instinct. He never heard her raise her voice. She seldom cried. But there were moments, late at night, when she thought he was asleep, when he heard her whisper prayers under her breath, pleading with whatever spirits might be listening to watch over the boy she knew would not remain hidden for long. Her fears proved right. Jonah's life began to unravel the year he turned 12. A boy on the plantation, smaller, weaker, constantly harassed by a cruel field hand, had been cornered behind the stables. The man struck the child hard enough to draw blood. Jonah, passing by with a bundle of firewood, saw the blow fall and felt something ignite inside him. It was not rage. Not yet. It was a tightening, a coil snapping free. He dropped the wood and moved without thought, stepping between them. The field hand laughed at first. Then Jonah struck him. Witnesses would later swear the boy's fist moved faster than they expected. The man staggered backward, stunned. Jonah hit him again. And again. The man fell to the dirt, coughing blood, unable to rise. Jonah stood above him, chest heaving, hands trembling as though unable to understand the strength they carried. That single moment sealed his fate. His mother tried to shield him. She pleaded with the overseer. She begged the master to show mercy. But fear outweighed pity. Jonah was punished, beaten, shackled, and within a week sold at auction, his price higher than boys his age usually fetched. Buyers noted his size, his potential for field labor, perhaps even more. No one mentioned the truth aloud. Boys who fought early were dangerous. He arrived at Riverbend at 14, half-starved from the journey but still broad-shouldered and alert. Abner Caldwell examined him personally, circling him the way a man might assess a newly purchased stallion. Jonah said nothing. He held himself still, though his wrists bled from the iron cuffs. Caldwell nodded once, satisfied. "Good frame," he said. "Strong legs. He'll grow into something useful." What Jonah did not know then, what no one told him, was that Caldwell had been searching for a fighter. Not a common brawler. Not a man for sport or plantation wrestling. Caldwell wanted something more sinister. He wanted a vessel through which he could control fear itself. And when he saw Jonah, he sensed potential immediately. The training began in small, subtle ways. At first, Jonah was assigned to the fields, learning the rhythms of rice cultivation under the burning Carolina sun. But Caldwell watched him closely. He noticed how Jonah lifted heavier sacks than other men, how he never complained, how the older slaves gave him wide berth. Within months, Caldwell had him cleaning the tobacco barn, reinforcing the circular pit beneath it, and learning the layout of a space that felt more like a grave than a room. Jonah noticed the hooks first, then the stains on the wood, then the uneasy way the enslaved men avoided looking toward the ring when they walked past the barn. He understood, without needing it explained, that something foul had happened there. Something that would, in time, involve him. Fear tightened inside him, but not the way most men feared. Jonah did not tremble. He did not flinch. But his breath went shallow and his sleep grew restless. Caldwell's subtle grooming turned into forced demonstration. One afternoon, while Jonah was splitting logs behind the barn, Caldwell ordered 2 enslaved men to attack him without warning. Jonah reacted by instinct alone, knocking one man unconscious with the back of his arm, sending the other crashing into the woodpile. When he realized they had been commanded, not malicious, Jonah stepped back in horror. Caldwell only smiled. "The instincts are already there," he murmured. "They only need direction." And direction he gave, cruelly, meticulously. Night after night, Jonah found himself summoned to the barn. Caldwell would observe from the shadows, lantern in hand, instructing Jonah to defend himself against stronger and stronger opponents, sometimes without food, without rest, without reason. Jonah did not want to hurt them, but refusal was impossible. Disobedience meant the lash, or worse, punishment for the people Jonah cared for. Maria's warnings echoed inside him like a prophecy fulfilled. Your hands ain't meant for chains. But now they held something far heavier. By the time Jonah turned 15, the death ring was ready. So was he. And whether he wanted the role or not, Caldwell had already decided that Jonah would become the weapon Riverbend was built upon. Neither man realized how far that decision would reach, how many lives it would claim, or how history itself would bend beneath the weight of Jonah's unspoken fury. The night of Jonah's first duel did not arrive with thunder or storms. There were no celestial omens, no trembling earth, no howling winds. It came quietly, slipping into Riverbend like a shadow, slow, cold, inevitable. The moon hung low over the marshlands, pale and swollen, its reflection trembling in the waterlogged fields. Lanterns flickered along the path to the old tobacco barn, carried by men who whispered and laughed nervously, like gamblers gathering for a spectacle they pretended they had no part in. Jonah sensed something was wrong long before he was summoned. Attention had been building in the quarters all day. Slaves avoided his gaze. Overseers spoke in low voices. Even the animals seemed unsettled, shifting in their pens with restless agitation. Jonah sat on the step outside the quarters, elbows on his knees, staring at the distant line of cypress trees. The scent of wet soil filled the air. A breeze passed through, carrying the faint smell of burning oil from the barn. He knew it was time. When 2 overseers appeared at dusk, Jonah rose without a word. They didn't bind him. Caldwell ordered it that way. He said ropes made a fighter look weak. Jonah walked behind them silently, his heavy footsteps sinking into the damp earth. The overseers never looked back, but their shoulders tightened with every step, as if they feared Jonah might change his mind and tear them apart. He didn't. He wouldn't. His defiance lay buried beneath something deeper, the need to protect the few pieces of his world that hadn't yet been taken from him. The tobacco barn loomed ahead, dark against the starlit sky. Lanterns glowed inside, casting long shadows that danced across the warped wooden boards. Laughter drifted out, white men laughing in the slow, greedy way of spectators before the killing starts. When Jonah stepped inside, the laughter stopped. Men turned. Eyes widened. A hush spread across the room like a drop of ink in water. Jonah's sighs alone commanded attention, but it was the silence that unsettled them the most. Fighters often snarled, shouted, cursed. Jonah did none of that. He stood with his arms at his sides, steady, breathing slow, gaze low. It was the posture of someone who understood the violence waiting for him and accepted it with a quiet, dreadful certainty. Below them, the ring glowed under a circle of lanterns. The pit had been cleared, the floor packed with dirt, the wooden posts polished from years of sweat and struggle. Iron hooks gleamed along the walls, a reminder of what happened to those who lost. Abner Caldwell stepped into the center, his face flushed with excitement. His voice boomed through the barn. "Gentlemen, tonight we witness something rare. A boy, 15 years old, against a grown man. A test of nature, of strength, of will. Jonah did not raise his eyes. He barely heard the cheers. His gaze remained fixed on one figure near the back of the barn. His mother, Maria, forced to stand among the enslaved servants brought to clean afterward. Her face was tight with fear, her hands clasped so hard her knuckles had turned white. Jonah felt something twist inside him. It was not anger. Not yet. It was the slow unraveling of the last piece of innocence he had left. When Caldwell ordered Jonah into the pit, he moved like a man stepping into his own grave. His opponent entered from the opposite side, an older enslaved man, broad-chested, hardened by years of field labor. His face held no malice, only resignation. He looked Jonah in the eye and with a voice rough from disuse murmured, "I'm sorry, boy." Jonah swallowed. "Me too." Then the gate slammed shut. The crowd leaned forward, breath held, excitement coiling like a snake waiting to strike. The man attacked first, charging with the desperate strength of someone fighting for survival. Jonah blocked the blow, but the impact sent a shock through his arm. The man was stronger than he appeared. Jonah staggered back, stumbling in the dirt. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The man struck again. A fist to Jonah's ribs. Another to his shoulder. Jonah grunted, feeling pain bloom under his skin like fire. For a moment he saw stars. He tasted blood. His fear was sharp now, real, overwhelming, clawing through him. He felt small, weak, broken. But then he saw Caldwell. The planter's gaze was fixed on Jonah with predatory satisfaction. And beside him, Maria trembled. Something snapped. Jonah rose, exhaling slowly. His opponent hesitated, seeing the shift. Something dark, something ancient, something terrifying awakening inside Jonah's chest. The man swung again. This time Jonah caught the blow. His fingers closed around the man's wrist like a trap. A gasp rippled through the onlookers. Jonah pulled him closer with a single motion, a blur of strength and instinct. The man tried to wrench free, panic rising, but Jonah slammed his forehead into the man's jaw. The crack echoed like a splitting bone. The man fell. Jonah did not want to finish it. Every part of him screamed to stop. But he saw Maria again. He saw Caldwell's smile. And he understood the truth. Refusal would not save him. Mercy would not save the man. The ring had only one law. Jonah struck once more. Art. Final. Silence swallowed the barn. Caldwell stepped forward, exhaling with delight. "Gentlemen," he announced, "I believe we have found our new champion." Jonah stood in the center of the ring, chest rising and falling, hands trembling. He did not look at the dead man. He did not look at Caldwell. He looked only at his mother, her eyes filled with sorrow, fear, and something far heavier. She whispered words no one else heard. "This ain't the end, Jonah. This the beginning." Neither of them knew how right she was. Word of Jonah's first victory spread across Riverbend faster than the tide that swept through the marshes each morning. He felt it in the way other enslaved men stepped aside when he approached, their eyes avoiding his. He saw it in the overseer's glances, half admiration, half fear. Even the plantation women whispered when he passed, voices low, uncertain whether Jonah was a man to pity or something far more dangerous to fear. But the only reaction that mattered to Caldwell was the one he saw on the faces of his fellow white planters. The night after Jonah's duel, they had gathered around him, eyes gleaming with excitement, speculating about Jonah's future as if discussing the breeding potential of a prized stud. "That boy will make you a fortune," one man said. "Strength like that? He'll draw crowds from Savannah to Charleston," another laughed. "You better hope he don't turn on you." Caldwell only smiled. He had waited years for a fighter like Jonah. But wealth produced appetite and appetite produced greed. Within days, Caldwell began planning ways to make the death ring more profitable. He invited plantation owners from neighboring counties. He sent quiet letters to traveling gamblers. He made promises, secret promises, about what Jonah would do and what men might gain by wagering on him. Jonah knew none of this at first. What he knew was that life did not return to normal. After the killing, sleep became a stranger to him. Nights were long and heavy, haunted by the memory of the man who had apologized, "I'm sorry, boy," before stepping into a fate neither of them chose. Jonah replayed those two words over and over, each time hearing something different. Fear, grief, acceptance, and worst of all, hope that Jonah might survive. Those words twisted inside him like a knife. Days grew longer. Nights grew shorter. Jonah tried to bury himself in labor, hauling sacks of rice, repairing fences, clearing brush, but no amount of work quieted the restlessness inside him. His muscles ached, but not from labor. His chest tightened with a pressure he couldn't explain. Some nights he woke gasping, heart pounding, fists clenched so tightly the veins swelled like cords under his skin. Something inside him was changing. Caldwell noticed. He always noticed. One morning, after Jonah split an entire stack of logs twice the height of a man, Caldwell approached him with a calm smile that meant danger. "You are wasting strength on work meant for ordinary laborers," he said, adjusting his spectacles. "Your purpose is greater now." Jonah stared at the ground. He did not answer. Caldwell tilted his head. "You understand what I am saying?" Jonah swallowed. "Yes, sir." "That is good." Caldwell stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You were born for this, Jonah. You were born to fight." Jonah's jaw tightened. "I didn't choose that." "Choice is a luxury," Caldwell replied. "And luxuries belong to men who own land." He turned away before Jonah could respond, but the words lingered in the air like smoke, heavy, clinging, suffocating. Over the next weeks, Caldwell escalated the training. Jonah faced men from other plantations, fighters with experience, men who had been hardened by labor and suffering. Some charged with fury, others with desperation. But none matched Jonah's strength. Caldwell made sure every fight had witnesses. Men who watched with awe whispered to others. Rumors spread like fever. "Caldwell has a monster. No, he has a legend. Strongest I've ever seen. He's gonna die in that pit one way or another." Jonah tried to remain calm. He kept his head down in the quarters, helped the older men with their tasks, carved toys for the children from old wood scraps. Anything to remind himself he was human. But the more he tried to escape what Caldwell wanted, the more the plantation reshaped itself around him. Fear traveled strangely among the enslaved community, whispered, cautious, layered with both awe and sorrow. Jonah overheard them one evening as they gathered by the fire. "That boy ain't right," one elder said. "Not in spirit." "He ain't cursed," another replied quietly. "He's trapped. Ain't no man can kill like that without losing himself. Ain't no man can live like this without breaking." Jonah listened from a distance, heart heavy. He didn't blame them. They were not wrong. And yet, not everyone avoided him. A young boy named Micah, barely 10, sat beside Jonah one night after supper. The boy spoke with a directness that unsettled Jonah. "You gonna fight again?" Micah said. Jonah nodded. "Yes." "You scared?" Jonah hesitated. "I don't know. I think you scared." The boy's voice softened. "But not of them." Jonah looked down. "Then of what?" Micah shrugged. "Of what's growing inside you." Jonah had no answer. What Micah did not know, what even Jonah did not yet understand, was that fear had become something new inside him. Not fear of pain. Not fear of death. Something deeper. Something that curled inside his chest like heat waiting for oxygen. It was the slow becoming of a weapon. Weeks passed. Then came the first invitation from outside Beaufort County. A duel requested by a planter from Georgetown. A man known for his pride. A man Caldwell despised. Caldwell accepted immediately. Jonah did not hear about the match until the evening before. The moment the words left the overseer's mouth, Jonah felt the air shift around him, heavy with a weight he could not name. The killings were no longer about survival. They were strategy now. Politics. Power. And Jonah understood what that meant. He was no longer a boy forced to kill. He was a man being shaped into something far more dangerous. Something that even Caldwell would one day lose control of. The day the outsider arrived, Riverbend felt different. Uneasy, restless, as if the land itself sensed danger coming. Jonah noticed it before anyone else. Birds that usually crowded the cypress trees were gone. The air felt tighter, heavier. Even the dogs kept near the quarters, their ears pinned back, their movements anxious. Jonah stood near the tool shed that morning, sharpening a rusted hoe, listening to the strange stillness that settled over the plantation like a warning. By mid-afternoon, the newcomer's wagon rolled through the gates. A polished carriage drawn by two tall horses, the type only wealthy planters used for travel. Dust rose behind it in long curls, shimmering under the hot Carolina sun. Overseers straightened. Slaves paused mid-task. Eyes watched from every corner. From inside the carriage stepped Silas Crowther. A name Jonah had heard only whispered. A man whose reputation filled rooms long before he entered them. He was tall, lean, his frame wiry rather than strong, with a sharp, fox-like face and pale eyes that seemed to notice everything. His clothes were immaculate, a deep green coat, gold buttons, polished boots, and his smile looked like it belonged to someone who enjoyed deciding the value of another man's life. Caldwell walked out to greet him, smiling too broadly, hands spread as if welcoming an old friend. "Silas, you made good time." Crowther's eyes drifted over the yard, assessing the people, the layout, the tension in the air. "I do not waste daylight," he replied. His voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of a man accustomed to being listened to. "Where is the boy?" Jonah stiffened. Caldwell chuckled. "He is not a boy anymore. I will be the judge of that." Those words, casual, dismissive, dripping with arrogance, carried farther than Crowther intended. Jonah heard them. So did the enslaved men standing near the barn. One of them muttered under his breath, "Ain't no good man ever talk like that." Another answered, "He don't come here for talk." Jonah returned to his work, but every part of him remained alert. Late that evening, after the fields quieted and the shadows lengthened across the property, Jonah was summoned again. He walked to the barn at a steady pace, each step sinking into the damp earth. Lanterns blazed inside the ring, brighter than usual. Crowd larger. Noise thicker. Caldwell wanted to impress someone important. Inside, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Men drank heavily, slapped each other's backs, shouted wagers and predictions. But when Jonah entered, voices died down, replaced by murmurs that wove through the barn like a cold draft. "There he is. Lord, look at the size of him. Crowther ain't seen nothing like this." In the corner near the post, Jonah saw Crowther watching him with unsettling interest, not admiration but calculation. As if Jonah were a puzzle piece he intended to fit into his own ambitions. Caldwell raised his hands. "Gentlemen, tonight's match is a special one. A demonstration for our esteemed guest." The crowd erupted in cheers. Jonah's opponent stepped into the ring, older, scarred, muscles hardened by decades of brutal labor. His eyes held no fight, only exhaustion. Jonah felt his chest tighten. Another man forced into the same cage. Another life offered up for entertainment. Caldwell signaled for silence. "Show Mr. Crowther what Riverbend has created." The duel began quickly. Jonah didn't want to hurt the man. He blocked more than he struck, moving defensively, trying to guide the fight without ending it. But the crowd grew restless. "Hit him. Finish it, boy. Show the man your worth." Then Jonah saw something he had not expected, Crowther whispering in Caldwell's ear. Caldwell's face changed, darkened, tightened with impatience. He stepped closer to the pit and hissed, "Do not waste my time." Jonah's heart sank. The older man rushed him, out of fear more than aggression. Jonah sidestepped, catching his arm, bringing him down with controlled force. The man hit the ground hard, breath knocked from him. Jonah knelt beside him, murmured quietly, "Stay down. I don't want to do this." But the man, trembling, whispered the truth Jonah already feared. "They kill me if I stop." Jonah closed his eyes. And something inside him, the same thing that had snapped during his first duel, rose again, uncoiling with violent clarity. Jonah struck once. A merciful blow. Swift. Final. The barn fell silent. Crowther clapped slowly. "Impressive. Controlled. Efficient. Tell me, Caldwell, how many has he killed?" Caldwell lifted his chin proudly. 14. Crowther's smile widened. "Then let him kill 30 more. And I will pay you more than this plantation is worth." A chill rippled through the barn. Jonah saw Caldwell's eyes fill with greed. Saw the promise of new chains tightening around him, chains heavier than iron. When Jonah stepped out of the ring, Crowther blocked his path. The man looked him over and said low enough for only Jonah to hear, "You belong to the wrong master." Jonah stared back, silent, unreadable. Crowther leaned closer. "And men born with strength like yours, they always change the world around them. One way or another." He stepped back, leaving Jonah with words that felt less like observation and more like prophecy. That night Jonah did not sleep. He walked the perimeter of the quarters until dawn, the same uneasy tension pulling at him. He knew something was coming. Something that would drag Riverbend deeper into blood and darkness. And Jonah sensed the terrible truth in his bones. He would be the one forced to walk at its center. The 34th duel arrived not as an event, but as a storm, quiet at first, gathering slowly, then swallowing everything in its path. It would become one of the most whispered nights in Riverbend's history, a night when even the bravest men felt the ground shift beneath them. Days before it happened, Jonah felt something in the air tighten. The overseer spoke in clipped tones. Caldwell walked with the arrogance of a man awaiting a prize he already believed belonged to him. And the slaves, sensing a dread they could not name, avoided the barn altogether, refusing to walk near it even in daylight. Jonah spent the morning hauling barrels of rice, the sun burning against his back. Sweat rolled down his spine, but his breaths remained steady. Strength had become both his advantage and his curse. He finished the task alone in half the time others took in teams of 3, which only deepened the isolation surrounding him. Once, strength had drawn community. Now it created distance. Men stepped away when he passed. Women lowered their heads. Children watched him with frightened fascination. Only one person approached him that day, Elias Harper, the white farmhand who kept mostly to himself. Elias was 20, with shaggy brown hair and a quiet, thoughtful demeanor that set him apart from the louder, harsher workers on the plantation. He carried a small carton of tools in his arms as he walked up to Jonah. "They're fixing the northern levee again," Elias said, setting the tools down. "Overseer wants me and you to check the beams." Jonah nodded but didn't speak. Elias stood there for a moment, studying him. "You heard, ain't you? About the man they bringing in?" Jonah paused his work. His hands stilled around the barrel rim. "No." Elias wiped sweat from his forehead. "Scottish. Bare-knuckle fighter. Big one. They say he once broke a man's spine with his knee." Jonah looked away, jaw tightening. Elias lowered his voice. "Caldwell paid a fortune to have him brought here. Says this one's gonna make people talk all the way to Charleston." Jonah didn't need Elias to finish the sentence. He already knew. They wanted him dead. The stronger Jonah became, the more Caldwell pushed him. But Jonah also sensed something else, Caldwell's growing fear. Greed had created Jonah. Fear now controlled Caldwell. And fear, Jonah knew, made men reckless. As dusk fell, Jonah felt the sky grow heavier. Clouds gathered above the marshes, thick and low, casting the land in shadow. By the time the overseers came to summon him, the air smelled of rain that refused to fall. The barn glowed with lanterns, brighter than Jonah had ever seen. Men packed the rafters and the walkways, planters, patrollers, gamblers, all buzzing with anticipation. Coins clinked. Liquor poured. Voices rose in excited murmurs. But beneath the noise, Jonah felt something else, tension sharp and electric. Caldwell stood at the edge of the ring, his smile stretched too wide. "Tonight," he announced, "we test the limits of Riverbend's champion. Tonight, strength meets skill." The Scottish fighter stepped into view, and a ripple of unease passed through the crowd. He was enormous. Not Jonah's quiet, controlled strength, but brutal, carved muscle, arms thick as logs, chest broad as a barrel, beard wild and unkempt. His knuckles were swollen wrecks of bone. Scars crisscrossed his torso like a map of past victories. His eyes, cold, unreadable, empty of mercy. He entered the pit with a slow, deliberate swagger. Jonah felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. This was no ordinary opponent. This was a man trained to break others. The gate slammed shut. No signal was given. No words exchanged. The Scotsman attacked first, exploding into movement with startling speed. Jonah ducked the first blow, barely. The second grazed his jaw, sending a shock down his neck. The third caught his ribs, and Jonah felt the breath ripped from him. The crowd roared. Jonah staggered back, gasping. Pain lanced through his chest. The Scotsman pressed forward, fists hammering like a blacksmith at an anvil. Jonah blocked what he could, but each impact rattled him down to the bone. He had never been hit like this. Caldwell leaned forward eagerly. "Break him," he muttered under his breath. The Scotsman grabbed Jonah by the arms, lifting him off his feet as if he weighed nothing. Jonah felt the world spin, his back slamming into the ring wall. His vision blurred. A metallic taste filled his mouth. For the first time in his life, Jonah felt something he had never allowed himself to feel in the ring. Fear. The Scotsman charged again. But then Jonah heard a voice above the crowd. "Jonah, get up." "Elias." The sound cut through the ringing in Jonah's ears. Jonah rose slowly, breath trembling, ribs burning, every part of him screaming to stop. But he didn't stop. He stood. The Scotsman laughed, a deep, mocking sound, and rushed forward for the finishing blow. Jonah stepped aside. Not by instinct, by choice. The Scotsman stumbled. Jonah seized the moment. He drove his elbow into the man's throat. The Scotsman choked, eyes bulging. Jonah struck again, fist to ribs, knee to gut, hand to jaw. Each blow fueled by every buried moment of fear, every loss, every forced killing. The Scotsman fell to his knees. Jonah grabbed him by the collar and with a final, brutal motion, ended the match. Silence crashed over the barn. Men stared at the pit in horror. Even Caldwell looked shaken. Jonah stood over the fallen body, chest heaving, blood smeared across his face. And for the first time since the duels began, Jonah felt something different inside him. A heat, A fire, not of violence but of awakening. He looked at Caldwell. And Caldwell flinched. Jonah had survived. But something had changed. Not in his body. In his soul. In the days after the 34th duel, Riverbend moved like a place holding its breath. No one said the words aloud, but everyone felt them. Jonah should have died. Instead, he'd walked out of the barn bloodied but standing, while the Scottish fighter lay broken on the ground. That alone would have been enough to feed rumors across Beaufort County. But it was not just the victory that unsettled people. It was the way Jonah had looked at Caldwell afterward. Not with fear. Not with obedience. With recognition. The relationship between master and fighter had shifted in that single gaze, and everyone who saw it felt something cold creep down their spine. Men who had once joked about Jonah now spoke of him in low tones. Some refused to attend future matches. Others demanded higher stakes, compelled by the morbid urge to see how far the legend could be pushed before it snapped. Silas Crowther heard the stories before he even returned to Riverbend. The news rode on the backs of traveling gamblers, whispered in taverns, discussed in the private parlors of planters who never attended but always wanted to know. The tale changed with each retelling. Some said Jonah had lifted the Scotsman over his head. Others claimed he had fought for an hour without tiring. Regardless of the details, one truth remained consistent. Jonah had survived something meant to kill him. Crowther liked men who survived. He arrived at Riverbend again 6 weeks later, his carriage wheels crunching over gravel in the pale light of early evening. This time there were no polite pleasantries, no extended greetings in the yard. He walked straight to the main house, demanded whiskey, and shut himself in Caldwell's study. Voices rose. Not enough to be clear, but enough to let the house staff know they were arguing. "You are wasting potential," Crowther said sharply, his words muffled but edged with frustration. "You have a creature every man in this state is afraid of, and you keep him here? Hidden?" Caldwell's response was lower, harder to catch. "I keep him alive. That is the difference between me and you." "Alive for what?" Crowther scoffed. "So you can sell tickets like a fairground? I'm offering you more than coin. I'm offering you power. Influence. You think small, Abner." Silence stretched, heavy and dangerous. "What do you propose?" Caldwell asked at last. There was a pause. Then Crowther said quietly, "A private match. No wagers. No spectators, only the men who matter. The kind of men who make decisions for counties, not just plantations. I supply the opponent. You supply your monster. Afterward, we discuss terms." "What terms?" Crowther's tone went silk smooth. "Ownership." Caldwell's temper flared. "Jonah is mine." "For now," Crowther replied. "But monsters grow. And when they do, they devour the men who think they control them." The conversation ended without agreement, but the seed had been planted. Caldwell paced the study for hours after Crowther left, his thoughts circling like vultures over a battlefield. He wanted the power Crowther dangled before him. He wanted the influence, the connections, the prestige. But beneath the greed lived something he hadn't felt toward another man before. Fear. What would happen if Jonah ever decided that the ring was no longer his cage but his weapon? By midnight, Caldwell convinced himself there was only one way forward. He would accept Crowther's proposal. But he would stack the deck. Jonah heard nothing of this until the day he was chained. They came for him before dawn, when the mist still hugged the fields and the frogs in the marshes sang their hollow songs. 2 overseers and a patroller walked into the quarters, chains already in hand. Their faces were tight, their eyes avoiding his. "Caldwell wants you in the barn," one said. Jonah rose slowly from his cot. "I can walk." "Not this time." They shackled his wrists and ankles, the iron biting into skin still marked with fading bruises. Jonah offered no resistance. He watched their hands as they worked, listened to the dull clink of metal, felt the familiar weight of captivity settle over him like a shroud. Still, there was something different today. The chains were heavier, the air colder. As they led him across the yard, Jonah saw Elias working near the well, replacing a broken rope. Their eyes met. Elias frowned. "What's this?" he called out. "Business," one of the overseers answered. "Ain't yours." Elias's jaw clenched. He didn't move. Didn't look away either. Jonah held his gaze for as long as he could before they dragged him out of sight. They locked him in the barn, not in the usual holding pen near the ring, but against one of the central beams, iron braced around his wrists and ankles, chains bolted to the wood. He couldn't sit fully. Couldn't stand fully. It was a position designed not just to confine but to exhaust. Caldwell stepped into view, coat buttoned, expression carefully neutral. You have a match tonight, he said. Important men will be here. Jonah's throat felt dry. Who am I fighting? Caldwell studied him, eyes cold behind his spectacles. A man from Crowther's estate. A fighter? Jonah asked. A message, Caldwell replied. He moved closer, lowering his voice. You will win. You always do. And when you do, you will prove to those men that Riverbend is not just another plantation. It is a place of power. Jonah looked up through heavy lashes. And if I die? Caldwell's jaw tightened. Then you will have served your purpose. He left without another word. Hours passed. The barn stayed dim, light filtering through cracks in the boards, dust drifting like ash in the air. Jonah's shoulders burned. His wrists throbbed. But it wasn't the physical pain that ate at him. It was the quiet. In that silence, the truth settled over him like a weight he could no longer ignore. He would die here in this ring, for the amusement of men who considered his life nothing more than a coin tossed into a pot. Unless something broke. Footsteps approached, softer than those of an overseer. Jonah lifted his head. Elias slipped inside, glancing over his shoulder to make sure he wasn't followed. His face was pale, his jaw set in a grim line. They mean to kill you, Elias said without preamble. Crowther and Caldwell both. I heard them talking last night. Jonah didn't flinch. I know. Elias stared at him, frustration boiling under his calm exterior. Then run. Tonight. I can get you to the river. There's a break in the patrols on the east side after sundown. Jonah shook his head slowly. Running don't break this place. Elias stepped closer, voice sharp. Staying will not either. Jonah's gaze shifted to the empty ring. The wood. The hooks. The earth packed down with the weight of 34 bodies. One day, he murmured, this place gonna break. Elias followed his eyes. Something in the way Jonah said it sent a chill up his spine. This ain't prophecy, Jonah, Elias whispered. This is suicide. Jonah closed his eyes, feeling the chains bite deeper. Maybe. But I ain't dying for nothing. Not tonight. What neither man yet understood was that the match Crowther had planned would not end the way either he or Caldwell expected. Another man would die in Jonah's place. Blood would be spilled that could not be easily explained. And the story of that night would travel far beyond Riverbend, twisting into something larger, darker, more dangerous. People would say it was the beginning of the end. They would not be wrong. The night of the forbidden match descended heavy and airless, as if the sky itself leaned down to listen. Rain threatened all afternoon, gathering in swollen clouds over the rice fields, but none fell. Instead, the air hung thick and wet, clinging to skin, filling lungs with the metallic taste of coming thunder. Lanterns burned earlier than usual across Riverbend, their small flames struggling against the weight of the darkness. By sundown, only a handful of men arrived. They did not come in noisy carriages, fanning themselves and laughing loudly like the usual crowd. These men came quiet, deliberate, planters, magistrates, a wealthy merchant from Savannah, a judge from Charleston. Men whose signatures could move soldiers and change laws. Men who never wanted their presence at such a place recorded. Silas Crowther walked among them like a host in his own home. This is not entertainment, he reminded them, lips curling in a faint smile. It is demonstration. Consider what such a creature could do, in the right hands. They followed him toward the barn, boots sinking into the damp ground. No music played tonight. No drunken shouting. The silence felt like a veil. Jonas, shackled inside, sensed them before he saw them. The air shifted, heavier, colder, filled with something sharp and poisonous. Power. He could feel it even from the shadows where he hung, chains biting into his skin. Caldwell stepped inside first, lantern in hand. His eyes flicked to Jonah, hanging from the central beam, then quickly away as if looking too long might reveal something he did not wish to see. Unbind him, Crowther said. The overseers hesitated. Caldwell nodded. Do as he says. They unlocked the iron from the beam, but left the chain locked tight around Jonah's neck and wrists, links rattling as he moved. He stumbled when his feet hit the ground properly again, muscles screaming from hours of forced strain. He straightened slowly, rolling his shoulders back, the weight of the chain dragging at his collarbone. Crowther watched with cool admiration. A man who survives that can survive anything. The guests gathered along the wooden railings surrounding the ring, each man careful to remain half in shadow. They did not wish to be seen by anyone but each other. They would remember this night in whispers if at all. Jonah stepped toward the pit. His bare feet touched the packed earth, familiar and hateful. Every inch of this ring remembered what had been done here. 34 men had fallen in this dust. Their blood had sunk into the ground, staining it in ways no eye could see but every soul could feel. Tonight would make 35. Caldwell cleared his throat. Gentlemen, you know why you are here. You have heard the stories. Tonight you see for yourselves. He gestured toward the opposite gate. Bring him in. The man they brought into the ring was unlike anyone Jonah had ever faced. He was not a slave. Not exactly. The heavy iron collar around his neck marked him as something else. Property of the state, not a single man. A convict. His wrists were manacled, freed only once he stepped inside the ring. He had the body of a butcher. Thick arms, compact frame, shoulders that looked like they'd been carved from stone. His skin was pale beneath a network of scars. Eyes pale blue, cold as river ice. His nose had been broken more than once. His hands. Jonah noticed his hands. They were wrong. The fingers were gnarled, crooked from years of breaking and healing badly. Knuckles swollen, skin thick and calloused. These were not hands made for tools or rope. They were made for striking. The men above leaned in. That is the Charleston man? The one they say killed 3 in the yard? They said 4. They say a lot of things. Jonah and the convict stared at each other across the ring. Name? Jonah asked quietly. The man tilted his head, surprised at being addressed. Doyle. Doyle's voice was rough, scraped raw from disuse or shouting, or both. Jonah inhaled slowly. You forced here too? Doyle's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Aren't we all? Crowther lifted his hand. No more talk. The lantern flames seemed to draw back in anticipation. No signal was given. Doyle moved first. He didn't charge. He stalked forward with measured steps, weight low, guard up, eyes studying Jonah's stance. This was not a desperate man. This was a trained killer. He feinted left, then drove a fist into Jonah's ribs before Jonah could fully adjust. Pain exploded through Jonah's side. He grunted, stumbling. The watching men murmured. Doyle pressed his advantage, fists flying. He struck Jonah's jaw, shoulder, stomach. Each blow thudded against muscle and bone, heavy, precise. Jonah tried to block, but Doyle read him like a familiar page, slipping around defenses, always one breath ahead. Another hit. Another. Another. Jonah's vision blurred. He felt the chain tug at his neck as he staggered back, metal scraping his skin. Blood filled his mouth, copper and salt. His ribs screamed. His lungs burned. For a moment, he saw himself from above, just another man in the ring, bleeding for men who would never bleed for him. He could fall now. Let it end. But above the noise, he heard Elias. He wasn't in the barn. Jonah knew that. Elias had not been allowed in. And yet, Jonah heard his voice clearly in his memory. They mean to kill you. And beneath that memory, another surfaced. His mother's voice, soft and fierce, echoing from years ago. Your hands ain't meant for chains. Doyle swung again. Jonah moved. Not from instinct this time. From choice. He stepped in instead of back, letting the fist graze his cheek rather than crush his jaw. He grabbed Doyle's wrist, fingers locking like iron. Doyle jerked, trying to wrench free. Jonah twisted, turning his entire body with the motion, using Doyle's momentum against him. There was a sickening crack. Doyle screamed. His arm hung at a wrong angle. The powerful men above the ring leaned forward, shocked. Jonah did not pause. Pain roared through his own body, but something else roared louder now. A heat that had been held back for years, a fire denied oxygen finally catching flame. He struck. Not wildly. Precisely. A fist to Doyle's throat. A knee to his ribs. An elbow to the back of his neck. Each impact measured, controlled, devastating. Doyle collapsed, coughing, gasping for air that would not come. He tried to rise. Failed. Jonah grabbed the chain around his own neck, feeling the metal dig into skin rubbed raw. He did not think. He pulled. The overseers above shouted. Caldwell's face blanched. The iron link strained, creaked, then snapped free of the ring bolt with a shriek of torn metal. Silence fell. Jonah stood in the center of the ring, chain broken in his hands, chest heaving, eyes burning not with madness, but with something far more terrifying to the men watching. Clarity. He turned slowly until his gaze found Caldwell. Men shifted away from the planter without meaning to, as if some instinct whispered that distance might save them. Jonah lifted the dangling length of broken chain. Next time, he said, voice low but echoing in the stunned barn, it'll be you. For the first time since he had built the ring, Abner Caldwell felt true, unfiltered terror. He knew then, no matter what he did next, no matter how many patrols he hired or chains he purchased, the balance had shifted. Riverbend had created a monster. And now, the monster had decided what he would do with that power. The night would not end there. Before dawn, one of the powerful men watching would be dead, and nothing at Riverbend would ever be the same again. The barn emptied in a rush of fearful whispers and hurried footsteps, men tripping over each other in their haste to escape what they had just witnessed. The broken chain lay at Jonah's feet like a symbol of something far larger, an omen that Riverbend's order, its cruel architecture, had finally begun to crack. Lantern light flickered across the ring, casting Jonah's shadow across the dirt like a creature rising from the earth itself. Caldwell did not speak at first. He only stared, his breath trembling, his face pale beneath the thin sheen of sweat on his brow. Something cold crept through him, fear born not from danger, but from the realization that he had lost control long before tonight. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a wooden crate. His voice, when it finally returned, held none of its usual confidence. "Chain him," he rasped. The overseers hesitated. Jonah did not move toward them. He did not raise his fists or show his teeth. He only stood there, breathing steadily, blood dripping from his jaw, the broken chain dangling from his hand like a warning. That stillness scared them more than any display of violence could have. "Chain him," Caldwell repeated, louder this time, cracking under his own terror. The overseers approached tentatively. Jonah closed his eyes, not in surrender but in exhaustion, a deep, bone-heavy weariness that made the world tilt. They snapped new iron around his wrists, heavier this time, thicker links forged for livestock. Jonah allowed it. He did not fight. His energy was gone, spent in that final burst against Doyle. His mind swam between clarity and fog. When they dragged him toward the barn's holding stall, Jonah breathed in slowly, tasting smoke under the scent of oil and sweat. Smoke. He opened his eyes. Somewhere on the plantation something was burning. Not yet visible. Not yet close. But the night carried it, faint but unmistakable. The overseers didn't smell it. Caldwell didn't smell it. But Jonah did. He had always sensed danger before others. They locked him in the stall, slamming the iron latch shut. Jonah slumped against the wooden wall, ribs throbbing with each breath. The lantern outside cast a thin line of light across his legs. He listened to the men shouting outside the barn, frantic and disorganized. "Patrollers! Get patrollers!" He snapped the chain. The man snapped iron like rope. "Crowther wants him dead before sunrise." Caldwell said the same, "Don't let him see morning." Jonah did not fear their voices. He feared something else rising in the night, a feeling curling beneath his skin like a second heartbeat. The world was shifting, breaking, and he would be at the center. Hours passed. The guests fled the plantation. Caldwell locked himself inside the main house, pacing, drinking, muttering to himself. Overseers gathered rifles, loading them with shaking hands. They planned to kill Jonah before dawn, to hide the event, to bury the legend before it grew teeth. But someone else moved through the shadows of Riverbend. Elias. He sprinted across the yard, boots splashing through puddles, heart pounding against his ribs. Jonah's words echoed through him. One day this place gonna break. He didn't know what Jonah meant. He didn't understand half the things Jonah said. But Elias knew one truth clearly. The men planning Jonah's death were not going to wait for morning. And he couldn't let Jonah die alone in that barn. He didn't see the figure watching him from the darkness. He didn't feel the danger stalking just behind him. Not until a rifle butt slammed into the back of his skull. He fell without a sound. The man who struck him, Overseer Griggs, lifted him roughly, muttering, "Nosy little bastard." He dragged Elias into the barn, intending to hide him inside until things quieted. But Griggs never made it farther than the doorway. A knife flashed behind him. A grunt escaped his throat. He collapsed, blood pooling across the dirt. The figure behind him stepped into the lantern light. Maria, Jonah's mother. Her face was wet with sweat and tears, her breath heavy from running, her hands trembling as she gripped the bloodied knife. She had seen enough sons die on plantations. She would not lose hers. She cut the rope binding Elias's wrists, then rushed to Jonah's stall, stabbing at the latch until it gave way. The door swung open. Jonah lifted his head. Their eyes met across the dim, dusty stall. "Mama," he whispered, voice raw. "No time," she breathed. "They come in dot." And as if summoned by her words, shouts erupted outside. "Fire! Fire at the main house! Get water! Buckets! Move!" Jonah rose too fast. Pain shot through his ribs and down his spine. But he stood. The smell of smoke grew stronger, no longer faint, no longer distant. Flames licked the night sky through the slats of the barn wall. Screams echoed from the main house as fire devoured the windows. The blaze spread fast, fueled by old wood and oil lamps inside. Jonah shook the chains at his wrists. Maria hacked at the links with the knife, but the metal was too thick. "You ain't breaking that," she whispered, panic rising. Jonah closed his eyes. He didn't need to break the chain. He needed to break the beam. With a guttural cry, he slammed his arms upward, jerking the iron links against the wooden beam holding them. Once, twice. The wood groaned. Dust rained from above. Maria covered her mouth, eyes wide. A third strike. A fourth. A crack split through the beam like thunder. The chain tore through the wood, sending splinters across the stall. Jonah stumbled forward, arms bleeding, wrists bruised, but free. Elias rose groggily, clutching his head. "Jonah, we gotta go." But Jonah didn't move. His eyes fixed on the fire outside, flames spreading toward the barn, the overseers running, chaos unfolding across Riverbend. "I ain't leaving yet," Jonah murmured. He stepped past them, toward the doorway, toward the night lit orange by a growing inferno. The fight was no longer in the ring. It was at the heart of the plantation itself. And Jonah walked toward it. Because some chains were not meant to be broken quietly. The main house burned like a living thing. Flames climbed the white columns, licking upward toward the second-floor balcony, devouring paint and wood, turning lace curtains into drifting ash. Smoke poured from shattered windows, thick and black, carrying the sharp stench of burning oil, fabric, and flesh. The night pulsed orange and red, the sky above Riverbend flickering like an open furnace. Overseers ran in panicked circles, shouting contradictory orders, grabbing buckets too small and too late. Slaves were forced into lines, passing water from the well toward the house, but the fire had already taken root in its heart. Every bucket tossed against the blaze hissed and vanished, swallowed instantly. Jonah stepped out of the barn into that blazing chaos. Heat hit him like a wall. Sparks drifted through the air, landing on his bare skin, stinging like hornet bites. His lungs burned with each breath of smoke. The broken chain still hung from his wrists, metal clinking faintly as he moved. Maria and Elias followed close behind, eyes wide, stunned by the scale of the destruction. "Lord have mercy," Maria whispered. "It's all coming down." Jonah said nothing. He watched the scene with a strange, detached clarity. Men shouting, women crying, children clinging to each other. Somewhere inside that furnace, Caldwell was either fighting for his life or already gone. And part of Jonah knew, if Caldwell burned tonight, the story the world told about Riverbend would be written by someone else. But before that happened, there was something he had to do. "The quarters," Jonah said suddenly. "Back rows. They ain't unlocked the back rows." Maria stiffened. "There's still folk chained for punishment." Elias swore under his breath. "They'll burn if we don't get 'em." The overseers didn't care. Their focus was the house, the furniture, the ledgers, the symbols of wealth. Lives in the back rows were an afterthought, a loss written off as numbers in an inventory. Jonah moved. He sprinted past the confused overseers, ignoring their shouted commands, his body a blur of motion in the firelight. Elias hesitated only a moment before running after him. Maria followed, slower but determined, knife still clutched in her hand. The punishment shed sat behind the main line of quarters, half hidden by tall grass and shadow. Thick planks, heavy locks. No lanterns lit. The fire's glow washed faintly over them, turning the wood an eerie orange. Jonah reached the first door and slammed his shoulder into it. The wood shuddered, but the lock held. Inside, someone screamed. "Help. Somebody. We in here." Elias grabbed a broken tool from the ground, a rusted iron bar, and jammed it into the lock. Jonah took hold as well, muscles tightening, veins standing out along his forearms. Together they pulled. The wood groaned, nails squealed, and with a violent crack, the lock tore free. The door swung inward. 4 men stumbled out, shackles on their ankles, eyes wild with smoke and fear. "Run," Jonah ordered. "To the tree line. Stay low. Don't look back." They did as he said. He moved to the next shed. Another door. Another lock. Another desperate heave of iron and wood. Maria dragged the freed men away, pushing them toward the safety of the dark fields beyond the burning house. As they wrenched open the third door, rifle shots snapped through the night. "Stop right there." Overseers. Jonah turned, breath ragged, sweat and soot streaking his face. 3 men approached, Griggs among them, pale with fury, rifle raised. Another aimed at Elias. The third pointed straight at Maria. "You ain't lettin' criminals loose," Griggs snarled. "Get back from that door." Elias stood frozen, hands up. Maria's jaw clenched, eyes blazing. Jonah stepped forward, chain rattling. "You shoot them," he said, voice low and steady. "You best pray I die tonight." The overseers glanced at each other. Fear flickered across their faces, but habit, decades of unquestioned power, pushed them forward. Griggs spat on the ground. "You think I'm scared of you, boy?" He pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing across the yard. Maria jerked. For a moment, no one understood what had happened. Then she dropped the knife. Dropped to her knees. Blood bloomed across the side of her dress, dark and spreading. "Mama," Jonah breathed. The world narrowed to a point. The fire, the shouting, the crack of burning beams collapsing, it all faded. Only his mother remained, swaying, eyes wide with shock and pain. Elias moved instinctively, diving at Griggs before the overseer could reload. They hit the ground, wrestling for the gun. Another shot went off into the dirt. Jonah didn't feel the chain anymore. He didn't feel the bruises, the broken ribs, the exhaustion. He only felt the last fragile thread holding his restraint snap. He crossed the distance to the nearest overseer in 3 strides. The man tried to raise his rifle, but Jonah's hand closed around the barrel, wrenching it aside with inhuman force. The rifle flew from the man's grip. Jonah struck once, open-handed, but with enough force to send the overseer crashing unconscious into the dirt. The second tried to run. Jonah caught him from behind and brought him down hard. The chain wrapped around the man's throat almost of its own accord, metal biting into flesh. The overseer's hands clawed at it, eyes bulging, legs kicking. Jonah's grip tightened. Memories flashed. Every man he'd been forced to kill, every order barked from pale lips, every laugh echoing from the barn rafters as blood soaked into the ring. He let go before the body stopped moving. He would remember the sound those last breaths made for the rest of his life. Griggs and Elias still struggled in the dirt. Griggs managed to get a knee on Elias's chest, the rifle twisting back toward the young man. "Die with your pet," Griggs snarled. Jonah was on him before he could fire. He didn't speak. He didn't warn. He took hold of Griggs and tore him away, flinging him backward so violently he hit the side of the shed and crumpled, the rifle skidding across the ground. Griggs tried to rise, wheezing, spitting blood. Jonah picked up the gun. For a moment, firelight flickered across his face, turning his eyes into burning embers. Elias stared at him, chest heaving. "Jonah," he whispered, "don't." Jonah turned the gun not toward Griggs, toward the burning house. "Ain't enough bullets to fix this," he said. He tossed the rifle aside. Behind them, Maria coughed, blood on her lips. Jonah dropped to his knees beside her, lifting her gently. Her fingers brushed his cheek. "Told you, your hands ain't meant for chains." Tears blurred his vision. "Mama?" "Go," she whispered, "before they come back with more guns. This place already dying." Elias grabbed Jonah's shoulder. "She's right. Patrols will be here soon. They'll kill you on sight." Jonah looked at the burning house, at the overseers scattered like broken tools, at the freed men vanishing into the dark edges of the plantation. Then he looked at his mother. Some choices carved themselves. He stood. Smoke thickened, rolling across the yard. In moments it would swallow everything. Elias tugged at his arm, urgency in every line of his body. "Jonah," he said, voice breaking, "if you stay, this all dies with you." Jonah took one last breath of Riverbend's burning air. Then he turned toward the tree line. By the time the slave patrols arrived, Riverbend was a skeleton of its former self, charred walls, collapsed beams, the main house a smoldering ruin. 15 bodies would be found in the aftermath, some burned beyond recognition. Jonah's was not among them. But men like Caldwell would insist, in shaking voices and carefully worded reports, that he died there that night, lost in the blaze like just another nameless slave. The land, however, remembered something different. It remembered footsteps disappearing into the swamp, the faint glint of broken chain vanishing into darkness. And rumors would begin before the ashes even cooled. The fighter was still alive. The ghost of Riverbend had slipped its cage. 20 years passed before anyone spoke Jonah's name openly again. By then, the world had changed in ways Riverbend's former masters could never have imagined. The Civil War carved its way through the South like a storm that refused to leave, burning, drowning, uprooting everything false about the land's old order. Plantations that once boasted of lineage and honor now stood abandoned, their fields swallowed by weeds, their houses gutted by fire or looters or simple decay. Some fell to cannon fire. Others fell to time. Riverbend, already broken long before the war began, lay in ruins. The charred bones of the main house still jutted like blackened ribs from the earth. Nature crept back to reclaim what had once belonged to men who believed themselves invincible. Vines snaked over the remnants of brick. Trees sprouted where parlors once stood. Moss covered the scorched patches of soil where bodies had been buried in haste. But the land never grew quiet again. At least, not in the way it had before. Locals refused to walk past Riverbend after sundown. Hunters said the marshes near the property echoed with strange sounds, heavy footsteps, rattling metal, the muffled gasp of men in struggle. Children dared each other to approach the ruins at dusk, swearing they saw a tall shadow moving near the tree line. Adults told them these were ghost stories, remnants of fear stitched into the soil. But the older folks, those who remembered the night the house burned, never laughed. By 1864, Union patrols moving through Beaufort District set up temporary camps across abandoned plantations. They found ledger books, half-buried rifles, broken tools, scraps of letters sealed in soot. They also found silence, deep, oppressive, unnatural silence that hung over certain lands like a warning. Riverbend was one of those places. The detachment that arrived there consisted of 9 soldiers from the 55th Massachusetts, most of them freedmen who had taken up arms with the zeal of men reclaiming their own futures. Their commanding officer, a white lieutenant named Keating, paced through the ruins with a lantern raised high, boots crunching over charred debris. "Burned decades ago," he muttered. "Before secession." One of the soldiers, Corporal Isaiah Reed, knelt near the remains of the barn. His fingers brushed over a shard of iron half buried in the dirt. When he pulled it free, it jingled faintly, a broken chain link, thick as a man's thumb. "Sir," Reed said, standing slowly, "you see this?" Keating glanced over. "Farm equipment?" Reed shook his head. "No, sir. This is restraint metal. State issue grade." Another soldier approached, hearing the tone in Reed's voice. "Where'd you find that?" he asked. "Under the dirt," Reed replied. "Like someone tore the rest clean out." Keating walked closer. "There's no place on a small plantation that uses iron that thick." "There is," Reed said quietly, eyes drifting to the center of the barn ruins. "A fight ring." Keating frowned. "That's illegal." Reed looked at him with a silence that said more than words. "A lot of things were illegal, sir. Didn't stop no one." As the men explored farther, they found more disturbing remnants. Old bloodstains hardened into black patches on the dirt, rotted beams cracked in unnatural patterns, footprints carved into boards where someone had braced themselves with force beyond reason. Then they found the diaries, half-burned, half-written, tucked beneath a fallen dresser in what had once been Caldwell's study. Only fragments remained. The boy snapped iron. "Crowther demands a demonstration. No man should survive such blows. If he escapes, God help us." Keating read the words aloud, his voice wavering. Reed's eyes narrowed. "Sir, you know who this talking about?" Keating shook his head. Reed did. Because Reed had grown up hearing stories whispered by freedmen in Savannah. Stories of an enslaved fighter undefeated in the ring. A man who broke chains with his bare hands. A man who vanished into the swamps the night his master's house burned. A man who killed 37 men and walked away from hell. "They called him Jonah," Reed murmured. A silence fell. One of the younger soldiers scoffed nervously. "Ain't no man walk out of a fire like that." "Some do," Reed said. "And some don't walk out. They rise out." Keating exhaled. "Ghost tales." But Reed shook his head slowly. "My uncle swore he saw him. Years after Riverbend burned. Said a tall man came through the Georgia line with 2 runaways on his back, one wounded, one near dead. Said patrollers chased them into the swamp. Said only the 2 runaways came out the other side alive." The younger soldiers stared. "You saying Jonah saved them?" Reed didn't answer. He studied the ruins. "You ever hear the rest?" he asked. "What rest?" "That some nights, along the coast, soldiers and patrollers swear they see a man walking through the marshes. Tall, silent, carrying broken iron on his wrists. The wind shifted, blowing ash across their boots. Somewhere in the ruins, a beam cracked and fell. None of them spoke for a long moment. Keating cleared his throat. "Gather supplies. We camp elsewhere. This place," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "This place is done." But as they turned to leave, Reed glanced back one last time. For a heartbeat, just a heartbeat, he thought he saw a figure standing beyond the treeline, tall, motionless, watching. When he blinked, it was gone. He said nothing, because some legends didn't need belief. They survived on fear alone. Long after the Union soldiers left Riverbend, long after the war ended and the old world sank into mud and memory, the land kept its secrets buried in silence. But secrets never stay buried forever. Not the real ones. Not the ones written in fire and blood. In the spring of 1871, a group of northern surveyors arrived in Beaufort County to map abandoned properties for redistribution. Most plantations were easy to catalog, deeds still intact, structures visible, boundaries clear. But Riverbend confused them. Nature had swallowed it. Trees had risen from its foundations. The marsh had crept upward, reclaiming acres once flattened for rice. The main house was nothing more than a collapsed skeleton, barely recognizable. The surveyors spoke with locals asking for old records. Most shook their heads. Some refused even to say the plantation's name. But an elderly freedwoman, eyes clouded by age, voice steady as river stone, told them what others would not. "Riverbend ain't land," she said. "It's a grave." She guided them to the edge of the ruins, leaning on a crooked cane, and gestured to the charred beams rising from the earth. "That was the night the ghosts got born," she whispered. "Fire don't burn that hot without sin behind it." When the surveyors asked her about the enslaved who once lived there, she shook her head slowly. "Some died. Some ran. Some vanished in the swamp. But one," she tapped her cane twice against the ground, "one walked away from the fire without looking back. And men been looking for him ever since." They pressed her, asked his name. But she refused. "Names keep spirits restin'. You go speakin' his too loud, you gon' wake something that ought to stay asleep." Yet later, when they thought she wasn't listening, she murmured to herself, "Jonah. That boy was born with storms in his bones." The surveyors left uneasy. But the truth was not found in her words alone. It was found in a letter discovered months later during an archival sweep of confiscated property from the war. An old envelope, sealed but water-damaged, tucked inside a forgotten military trunk stored in Charleston. The handwriting inside was rough, untrained, but deliberate. It was signed by Elias Harper. No one knew why his letter had been hidden among military inventories. No one knew how it survived fire, war, and neglect. But it told everything. Not in the polished tone of historians. Not with the cold detachment of law. But with the trembling clarity of a man who had witnessed something that shattered and remade him. He wrote of the ring beneath the barn. The 37 forced deaths. The broken chain. The night the house burned. The overseers killed. Maria's final words. And Jonah's walk into the swamp. Alive, bleeding, but unbroken. The letter ended with a line that archivists copied again and again, unsure whether it belonged to history or myth. If the devil himself had come for Jonah that night, the devil would have turned back. The letter was quietly filed, stamped, and forgotten by the government men who handled it. They had no use for tales of fighters and ghosts. They were building railroads, not legends. But stories have a way of surviving where documents fail. Throughout the Reconstruction years, reports drifted across the Lowcountry like drifting embers, small, inconsistent, but persistent. A tall man seen near the Georgia edges, helping escapees avoid patrol remnants. A stranger who pulled a collapsed wagon off two trapped children with one hand. Footprints in the Okefenokee swamp, too large, too deep to belong to any normal man. A group of Seminole elders in Florida who spoke in quiet reverence of a man who fought off bounty hunters single-handedly and disappeared before anyone could thank him. None of these sightings were confirmed. All were believed. History never wrote Jonah's fate. No census recorded him. No grave marked his end. No witness claimed his body. And so his story slipped into a space between truth and legend. A ghost to the men who feared him. A symbol to the people who needed him. A reminder to the land that had tried to break him. Some said he died in the swamps during a storm, laid to rest by the river he once stared into as a boy. Some claimed he lived out his days quietly near the border, helping fugitives reach safety until age bent his back. Others whispered that he never died at all, that the marsh kept him, guarded him, preserved him as one of its own. But the final truth belonged to no one. If Jonah lived, he left no trace. If Jonah died, the earth refused to say where. What remained was the story, a man born in chains, shaped into a weapon, forced to kill for the amusement of those who claimed to own him, and yet, somehow, finding a way to break more than iron. A way to break a world. A way to break free. And somewhere in the marshes, where fog curls low over still water and moss hangs like curtains from twisted oaks, older men still claim that if you listen carefully, once the crickets go silent and the wind changes direction, you can hear the faint rattle of a broken chain. Moving. Walking. Not dragging. Because legends don't crawl. They rise. What do you make of Jonah's story? Do you believe he died in the flames of Riverbend? Or do you think he walked out of that swamp and kept moving long after the men who tried to own him were gone? His legend has survived nearly 2 centuries, whispered by those who claim they saw a giant in the marshes, a man carrying broken iron on his wrists. Tell me your interpretation in the comments below. If you enjoyed this tale and want more dark historical mysteries like this, stories buried under ash, forgotten by archives and carried only by rumor and warning, subscribe to Chronicles of Shadows. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story, and share this video with someone who loves narratives that blur the line between history and horror. These stories need to be remembered. These voices need to be heard. I'll see you in the next one.